Welcome to NPD's Industry Experts Face-to-Face. In this session, NPD's own Marshal Cohen, Chief Industry Analyst, Fashion, and Matt Powell, Vice President, Industry Analyst, Sports, explore the disruptovators that are shaking fashion to its foundation while sports rises to the top. Please take your seats as our program is about to begin. As a courtesy to our speakers, please silence your phones or put them on vibrate. Ladies and gentlemen, get your questions ready for our experts. Please welcome our moderator, NPD's own Paul Cantrell, Global Walmart Team Leader.
Thank you. Oh, hello. How is everyone? Well, this is going to be an interesting set. I guess that's turned on, so let me back away from that.
He'll lower it as
you got that lowered, so that's great. So this is a one-time only event because one of them I think is going to throw a knockout punch, and we aren't going to be able to redo this tomorrow. So we're really excited about having this here. As I mentioned, we're going to leave some time at the end for you all to ask some questions of both Matt and also Marshall. So look forward to that. So again, we have Matt and Marshall here to help us out. Marshall, very involved, has been involved in the retail industry for a number of years, both on the retail side and on the manufacturer side, and is going to add a lot of context and flavor to this discussion. He is NPD's Chief Industry Analyst, and if you haven't had an opportunity to, one of the things that Marshall does is he involves and engages both retailers and manufacturers in strategic planning sessions. And that has been a great opportunity for those who've experienced that. Marshall is very involved in the media as well. You can find him often quoted in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and other topics. And when it becomes holiday time, Marshall is on the road. And he's probably the first call that you'll see when they're leading indicators about what is happening with holiday on the Today Show, Good Morning America, CBS This Morning, and others. So Marshall's very involved in our industry. Matt is our Chief Industry Analyst on the sports, apparel, and leisure sides of the business. Very involved in those industries and helping us lead and understand consumer insights and his background in that space. So he has, over the years, been involved in the retail industry, working for Modell's as one of the retailers in that space, and then was the industry analyst for Sports One Source. Prior to coming to NPD. And he's again active in media as well, and you have a blog on?
Sneakernomics.
On what?
Sneakernomics. Sneakernomics
on, is that on Forbes?
Well, actually, it's all on NPD now.
All on NPD now.
Yeah, sorry.
So he does Sneakernomics. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, this is really an opportunity. It was set up very well in the intro that we heard. And this is about what's happening in the sports business and the apparel business. Where's that intersection occurring, and why is one of them seem to be winning and one of them seem to be losing? So we're going to figure out who's going to be the winner and who's going to be the loser in this. So to kick this off, what I'd like to do is I'd like you.
Me.
What the heck's happened to your industry?
My industry's been asleep at the switch, but the key thing to recognize is whether you're talking about sports, whether you're talking about fashion, whether you're talking about food, whether you're talking about underwear, it doesn't matter. This is a problem and this is a challenge that we all face. The ability for other industries to invade your space. And this is a really great example of it, which is why we chose this discussion. In the fashion industry, I've put out the term called fashion has been out-fashioned. And retail is killing retail. And everybody kind of sits there and goes, whoa, those are pretty bold statements. But what they really mean is that the industry has not done enough to keep pace with both the consumer and the competition. And the competition has basically emerged from outside of the core business. So what we really want you to basically take away today is the ability to be able to recognize that if you're not keeping pace with the consumer, you're going to lose out. And what's happened clearly is that in this case, the sports industry has figured out how to play into this athleisure, this athletic look. We've all seen it. Many of you traveled here. Just look at the people when they come on the plane with what they're wearing. It's scary. They shouldn't be wearing some of those outfits, we know. But the point
Matt,
really
your
is,
opinion. What's happened?
Yeah, well, I think that we can see in the sports industry much of what Marshall's talked about. We had an industry that sold expensive wicking T-shirts, but it was a tiny business. And then all of a sudden, a guy named Kevin Plank came along and showed them that it could be $1 billion business and took huge market share from everybody. The industry was really complacent on the women's side as well until a little company called Lululemon came along and showed them again there's $1 billion business out there. So even in the sports industry, which is leading this trend, there's been this inability to get in front of a fashion trend and drive it. I think in the larger sense, though, we have millennials who are really concerned about fitness and health and wanting to look like they are fit even if they're not, or look like they're getting ready to go to the gym even if they're not. That more casual side, sportswear side, has really driven this to its new heights.
Yeah. And how has that impacted the marketplace that the sports retailers compete in today? What dynamics do you see shifting?
Well, I think obviously the brands have been really strong here. We've seen, we'll have a slide here in a second that shows the impact of athletic apparel on the fashion market. Here we see that the athletic side of the business is growing much faster than the fashion side of the business, including footwear. So the sports part of the business has been really robust over the last 4 or 5 years.
So Marshall,
but
is
notice,
this a trend?
I want you to notice how this is starting to migrate downward.
Right.
What's happening? Basically, the sports industry is going to have a challenge in front of them in the ability to be able to keep innovating these products. And even when you look at the base layer business that Under Armour introduced early on, they had a challenge keeping it going, and then competition caught up. So the good news for the fashion side of the equation is even though they were late to the game, they're going to get in the game. In fact, they are already in the game. And what we're seeing are brands and retailers who are creating product that is going to compete directly with those sports brands at better prices and in some cases similar functionality. And that's the key, because the consumer is telling us they want comfort, they want function, and they want value. And now they're going to be able to get it. So you're going to have a challenge keeping those numbers growing.
Agreed.
So is similar going to be good enough, Marshall? Or is similar going to be subpar?
No,
because he's got to be raising his game too.
You know, it's interesting when you think about it. It's similar from the fashion side of the equation for me to be comfortable in wearing, stretch clothes. Similar is okay. I would think, though, and Matt will probably agree with this, that similar on the athletic side, listen, when I participate in the sports I do, I don't want second best, I want best.
We're seeing a lot of brands in the fashion side who are adding a technical-like element to their apparel, whether it's a zipper or a hoodie or a thumb hole, that kind of thing, to take what was a basic shirt and make it into an athletic shirt. Those products, however, are not going to perform if they are actually used for an athletic endeavor. So I think some of those customers who are picking up on this trend, the casual side of athletic, are going to be disappointed with the lack of performance and likely drift back to the more core heritage brands.
It's a poor workman who blames his sports clothes if they have a bad.
So as we look to the future, is it technology? Is it marketing? What is going to be this driver that's going to allow, from your perspective, Marshall, your fashion suppliers to be able to try to keep up with sports?
There's an interesting dynamic, and many of our industries have this in concert. And really what it is the technology exists. There are so many things that are already there. In fashion, there are fabrics that do unbelievable things, but the industry isn't prepared to make the commitment to it because they're not able to feel comfortable in getting that price. So it's going to take, in unison with retail and brands, the ability to be able to say, we're going to ramp this up, we're going to step this up and give consumers more product, better product, and yeah, you can charge a little bit more for it, but to keep creating the same old thing, the same basic core business, to protect that core, you're not going to get growth if you just sell the core business. Innovation is what drives growth.
So did sports look past that paradigm that exists in fashion?
No, I don't think so at all. I think the pressure continues on the sports industry to continue to innovate and bring fresh products to the marketplace. If we're giving the customer the same shirt we gave them 3 years ago, then we failed.
Yeah.
So they're constantly looking for new and more value-added products. So the pressure's on the sports industry for this authenticity as well.
One thing to take a look at is, and you'll start to see it in stores soon, are the sports brands trying to get into the fashion side of the equation, creating more casual products, even creating these offshoots of these lines. So it's not going to even be sports and technical product. They're going to try to go to the other side and compete in fashion.
For the first time in the 16 years that I've been doing research on the industry, we don't have a single performance footwear category that's trending positively in the United States right now. The business is all about sportswear. We did an interesting thing in our consumer panel data, the NPD consumer panel data, where we went back and said to the consumers, you bought an athletic shoe, what are you going to use it for? What's the primary purpose of it? And only 25% of the people who bought an athletic shoe said they were going to use it for sport. And so it's a sportswear business, but there has to be this rooting in authenticity and performance, I think, for the industry to continue to move forward.
So Marshall, for your industry, did they have their head in the sand and react late? Did they not react? Are they reacting now?
I think
what's going on?
It's sad to say, but the fashion industry is literally just waking up. One of the biggest problems has been the desire to be risk averse. Fashion, almost by definition, has the word risk in it. You want to put things out there that are going to get people excited. The fashion industry used to be the darling child of, being in a place where people would look up to that industry to sit there and say, oh, these are the colors that are important. But when I go into stores and I sit there and see the bath and bedding department has more color than the apparel business, when I see the kitchen appliances, KitchenAid having 27 colors in a kitchen mixer, a tabletop mixer, a countertop mixer, that countertop jewelry that nobody knows how to use, but they put it on there to look good. When that happens, that means the industry has clearly been outmarketed, and fashion has to get that leading edge back.
What's it going to take?
It's going to take color. It's going to take interest in resonating with the consumer. It's going to take the ability to be able to recognize that you cannot necessarily only rely on what you're doing as your core. It's also not necessarily trying to create the fashion. You have to be able to read the tea leaves. You have to understand what the consumer. Today's trends, if you think about this athletic trend, it is a consumer-born trend. This was not something that Nike, Adidas, or Under Armour went out and said, oh, we're going to dress America, we're going to dress the world. That's not what they did. What happened was the consumer said, we're going to adapt this product to what we want it to do and use it. And what fashion has to now do is be able to keep pace with the consumer and give the consumer what they want and when they want it, not try to sell swimwear in February and wool coats in August.
Very good. So go ahead, Matt.
Well, I was going to say, this is a really interesting slide. We looked across all of the industries that NPD measures and said which are the fastest growing subcategories and categories out there. And many of the categories that are on this list are categories that you could put under the umbrella of health and wellness. We're seeing a big trend in makeup around skin care, sun care, wearable technology. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Several running categories, outdoor toys, and so forth and so on. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, one of the retailers who's doing a good job in this area is Kohl's, and they have taken a company-wide effort against health and wellness. And it's not just in the apparel and shoe department; it's in home. It's virtually every category they have has. They've challenged their merchants to find a way to participate in this health and wellness trend that's happening.
Yeah, when I look at this chart, one of the things that I always like to point out is that when you look at the leading categories in this, and if you look at some of the ones that have certainly resurfaced or surfaced and grew, you see that there's a common denominator. It's called innovation. Right. It's the ability to be able to create something that gets the consumer excited and new. Makeup, which was not the fastest growing sector in the beauty business 2 years ago and even 3 years ago, has now emerged as the #1 growth category. So what's happened is the beauty business for 3 years running is the leading industry. You saw that slide this morning. It was a little hard to keep pace when Todd and Karen were showing slides, and they talked about all those industries that we track. Beauty was the #1 industry, and it's been so for 3 years. The reason why is they keep reinventing themselves. They have passion into the equation. And that's what's lacking in many of the other industries. Also, when you look across this, you'll see it's footwear inspired by basketball. That's not redesigning of a product or the new design of a product. That's the consumer saying, we're going to wear this and have no interest in wearing it, as Matt said. Only 25% of people actually wear basketball shoes to play basketball in. So there's, the third leading growth category, which has nothing to do with what the original design was. This is the consumer saying, we want to go back and wear those great shoes again.
Great. Matt, you talked about Kohl's and health and wellness and sports apparel and things. Your industry's not fared real well from a retail footprint lately. We've seen a lot of your retailers go under. Why that happen?
I think in the case of the retailers who've struggled, whether it's Sports Chalet or Sports Authority or Golfsmith, the common denominator really was that they were leveraged when they were bought by private equity, and they could not service the debt and run a successful retail business. And in today's retail world, and we've heard this theme throughout today, if you're not moving forward, you're dead. And they were not able to invest in the stores, in logistics, in e-commerce, all the things that are really necessary to drive the business today. I think the other dynamic is we just have too damn many stores in the United States, and we need to go through and are going through a serious rationalization of that. And then finally, there was no winter this year, and that pushed Sports Authority in particular over the edge.
So the ones that have survived, what's going to be their ticket for growth and profitable growth to maintain the business going forward?
I think they need to continue to offer innovative products, to take fashion risk, to not be afraid to try a new idea, a new brand. That is a consistent theme out there. Conservatism is not going to win the day here.
So they get aggressive, Marshall. Bring innovation to the sports side. How are your fashion retailers going to respond in kind to not lose share?
I hope they wake up and realize that the key to success today is really going to be about proprietary relationships with brands and with the ultimate consumer, the people who are actually buying it. If you don't have passion and personality as part of the dynamic, the consumer doesn't want to buy something that everybody else has today. They want to be able to have that old relationship with their store, or get product that not everybody else has, or the ability to be able to, and this is one of the reasons why the makeup business has been so strong, is the ability to have product that's designed or connects directly with you. So that's what has to happen. And I hope the sports industry does it as well, because frankly, that business is going to have some challenges when we look at the building of the wardrobe. If they're not constantly updating and innovating the product, we don't need more of the same.
So let's switch a little bit to the consumer. The consumer's changing quite a bit. Marshall, you touched a little bit on their defining retail and what apparel and product really looks like today. Talking about millennials and boomers, both independently, I'd like you both to respond to this, is what's changing there? What can we expect to see next? We've seen this trend. What do you guys forecast from a fashion perspective? What is going to be the emerging trend that we're going to see maybe next season? And from the same perspective from sports from you, Matt. You're up.
Okay, I'll go first. There's a concern I have, and we have to recognize that when we define the consumer within generations, that's all well and good, but that's not good enough. What we have to understand is someone who may be a millennial may be participating in the same activity or living the same lifestyle as somebody who's 50 or 60. And what that means is I'm not interested in just how old you are. I'm not even going to ask you how old you are, but I'm not interested in how old you are. I'm interested in how you live, as well as your age. So what's influencing you and how you basically live your lifestyle and how you spend. And I'll talk more about this tomorrow in more detail, but I'm not concerned about purchases. I'm concerned about spending. Millennials spend money. They don't accumulate products the way prior generations have. That's a huge difference when you try to relate to what the consumer's doing and how the consumer does it. So not only do you have to speak a different language, you also have to speak it at a different cadence with a different purpose in mind. So we're interested more in looking at total spend. Just think about how the younger generation spends on travel and spends on experiences. I mean, they'll go out of their way to just go take a picture on top of a mountain, spend every penny they have, and not be able to, come back and buy new jeans.
So let's go back. What is going to be the new trend in fashion that we see from both of those groups in the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, certainly the next trend is going to be the more athletic, the more comfortable, the more stretch-inspired. Men are going to start wearing stretch clothing, without having the stigma of that's not for us. So you're going to see a lot more of that. You're also going to see, we saw that movement towards more closer to the fit for guys, and women are going to also start to learn how to make that casual, that athletic look work. That's the next step. Right now we've got so many people out there doing it on their own. Brands are going to figure out, we're going to help you figure that out. That's the brand's challenge.
Great.
I think we're going to see a move following what's happening in the retro footwear, the classic footwear categories, to see more retro apparel. We're starting to see crew neck sweatshirts as opposed to hoodies. Track pants and track suits are coming back. Wind suits are coming back. And so I think there will be this return to retro in athletic, but the product will be performance product. It won't be the same old product that we had. There will be a performance element to it.
Great. So if you're a brand trying to think about how to participate effectively in the retail community with these changes, what should they be thinking about to be able to activate, to go make it big for them, make it work? What do they need to do differently?
Brands have to learn how to resonate with the consumer in today's environment differently than they have in the past. They can no longer rely on heritage. They can no longer rely on product by itself. That brand and retail relationship has certainly changed. We know as retailers close stores and retailers have to now go and find new avenues to connect online with the in-store environment, that's also the challenge of the brands to figure out how to go direct to consumer. Well, that's almost like now all of a sudden the retail brand relationship is adversarial rather than partnership. And that's going to be an interesting dynamic to watch as retailers close or retailers shift their brand portfolio. That's going to create brands to have to figure out how to change the dynamic.
I think the millennial consumer wants to do business, you and me. I don't think they care about all the logistics and falderall that has to happen. They just want to buy your products whenever, wherever, however they want to buy it. And we need to shift to really enhancing that kind of relationship with them. Social media has become so important in the sports industry, whether it's athletes tweeting about what they're doing or what they're wearing, to how commerce is done. And so that dynamic of social media and the individual relationship with the consumer, I think, is critical.
So tell to me a little bit then how that manifests itself if I'm a manufacturer and a need to do direct ship to a customer. Does that all change? Is it a closer relationship through marketplace? Explain a little bit your thoughts on that idea.
Well, it's a combination of both. In many cases, we're going to see brands have to ship direct to retail. I mean, if you think about the future of retail, it's not going to be about the inventory that's per se in the store. It's going to be about the inventory that gives you the ability to get it. We've already live in a society today where consumers are very comfortable, particularly the younger consumer, with getting it either next day or 2 days. Amazon Prime, the ability for them to have 30 million households in the United States where they have household Prime as part of that process of purchasing. Consumers willing to wait for 2 days to get that product. So what does that mean? That means that the stores now are going to be able to not necessarily carry the product. So you may go in, buy something. They may not have your size or color. They'll ship it to you. And you're going to be perfectly fine getting it the next morning at your doorstep or office. So that means now direct ship from brand is going to be a big part of the equation. And if you don't have that partnership with the retailer, the consumer is going to expect you to be doing it as a brand for them.
I think we're going to see the segmentation start to break down. In the sports industry, there's been a really highly developed concept of segmentation by retailer and brands and products within those brands. I think today, I have a couple of kids follow me on Twitter, and they are always saying to me, I don't really care where I get the shoe as long as I get the shoe. And so I think the dynamic starts to change a little bit in terms of which retailers are considered prestigious and which retailers are not. I used to buy a lot of my clothes from a department store out in the Northwest that was known for its upscale image. Now I buy my clothes from their, how'd I do? Now I buy my clothes from their off-price arm. And I feel like that now is the prestige to say, I got this jacket at half price. from this retailer.
Yeah, but it looks good on you.
And it looks like I paid half price.
Oh,
No, that's okay, good. So I think that the old way we used to think about upscale and segmentation in the marketplace is going to start to change.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about Amazon. They added 11 million items in 2 weeks last month. Very much focus on apparel items, a focus there. If you're a retailer or you're a manufacturer and you're trying to compete against that and you're talking about this personal connection with the shopper, what do I do? How do I manage against that phenomenon right now?
There are certain components that can help you be Amazon-proof or be competitive with Amazon, or in some cases you may even want to partner with Amazon. But the key to recognizing it is there are certain channels of distribution. The dollar stores do well against that model. The shopping networks do well against that model. The direct-to-consumer does well against that model. And certainly we know that the mass merchants have an opportunity to be able to do it now, with some of them even getting into the same kind of game. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic. But the key to really separate yourself from that marketplace environment is having that relationship, having that ability to be able to have your brand resonate, that personal connection. If you think about the younger generation, what they love to do is, whether they spend more or less for the product, they love to share everything they do and everything they wear with that. So if you just think about having and being a forum for them to be able to do that as a brand, brands that talk about having fanatical behavior from their consumers, their guests, or sometimes they even call them their partners, that's the key to really taking on just having a commodity available versus having a relationship and passion with a brand.
I think a brand that has a really robust e-commerce website, has terrific logistics, and by the way, if you don't, as a brand, shame on you, and what are you waiting for? I think a brand that has that can compete effectively against Amazon. They may choose to partner there to get the traffic, but at the end of the day, I think they can compete effectively on their own. And I think that most brands have terrific content that that can enhance this experience that Marshall's talking about with their consumer, whether it's in the sports side to have their athletes showing how to perform in the sports or how to wear the clothes. So I think all of that starts to come up as an effective way to compete against Amazon.
Let's talk now a little bit about brand. So we think about brand. Is brand as important as it was 2-5 years ago? And do you forecast in the fashion side of the business the brand will continue to grow? And I'd be curious on what your perception would be from the sports side of it as well.
Just think for a minute about some of these mammoth brands that either existed or are struggling to exist today. And what that tells us is you cannot rely on branding to be the essential connection. You have to make the brand have a pulse. You have to make the brand resonate with the consumer ultimately. And that's the mistake that a lot of them have done. They've allowed their brand to be diluted down. And again, this is something that we see across so many different industries where they've taken for granted the ability to be able to, oh, we were the #1 brand, or we're the #1, and then that heritage just doesn't carry forward. Think about every next generation wants to be the generation that discovers something new. So when we talk about millennials, what's the key to connect? Give them something that they feel that they can discover. I teach class at a couple different places, and the thing that I'm always amazed at is every time these students come in, one day this kid came in and started to tell me about, hey, how do you like my t-shirt? I was like, hey, nice. He goes, 100% cotton. And I was like, what? Yeah, that's great, comfortable, right? He goes, this is the greatest stuff. I'm going to tell all my friends about this. So he felt like he discovered cotton. They come dressed up in suits. They come to class dressed up in suits. I'm like, what's with the suit? You're dressed better than I am. And then they sit there and goes, hey, we discovered the suit. They think that they've discovered all these things. And that's really what it is about. So being able to have the brand offer the opportunity to sit there and put that personality forward is critical.
Going to be more critical or less critical 2 years from now?
Interesting question, because with the relationship with the retailer, less, but the relationship with the consumer, more. And if you think about what I just said, we're creating this conflict. And why are the retailers now sitting there telling us, well, because they want the proprietary brand for themselves? Or The secret formula is going to be proprietary product within a brand that has a bigger portfolio.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think in the sports industry, brands is extremely important. We have brands in the sports industry that really dominate the space, whether it's a retailer or a product brand, and I don't see that changing. I think in the sports industry, particularly in the footwear industry, the barriers to creating new product, to getting started with a brand, are very high, and my expectation is that funnel will narrow, not increase.
Team sports, licenses, that whole piece. Do you see that becoming more and more of a important piece of the industry, or is personalization and who I am and what I am about, is that really what's going to matter to drive the sports and apparel business going forward?
Yeah, we're starting to see licensed apparel starting to return as streetwear again. I've been expecting this to happen with the strength of the sports apparel business being what it is. I have expected it to happen, and I'm now starting to see kids wearing licensed jerseys, ball caps, and that kind of thing on the street again, as opposed to just wearing it to the event. At the same time, there is definitely a personalization thing happening where I can get my own name or my favorite player's nickname put on a jersey and make it my own. There's no question that personalization will be probably the biggest wave of next new trend that we see in the sports industry, whether it's...
How's that going to work?
Well, to have a shoe made for myself. We saw this morning, the ability to 3D print a shoe and to use other methods to make shoes closer to the United States and faster and personalized. I think we will see in the next 10 years the ability to walk into a store, have your foot scanned, and have a shoe made specifically for you, your specifications, your colors, your cosmetic treatments, so that it is your shoe and your shoe only. Now, not everyone's going to buy a shoe like that because it's going to be expensive, but I think there'll always be an off-the-shelf business, but I think we will have the ability to purchase a shoe that's made just for me.
Let's talk a little bit about that. You said, if I talked about two concepts, personalization and retro. What's going to dominate over the next, or are they going to be pretty
short term? I think we remain in a very strong retro cycle, but again, the kid here is looking for a color that his friends don't have, a color that they haven't seen before. The brands are doing a brilliant job of bringing out new and fresh colorways. They've also modernized the retro product. The retro product is not the same shoe that was in the vault 30 years ago or 20 years ago. They're specifically shoes that look like the original, but they have a modern fit, modern make, modern weight, modern colors, all modernized for today's consumer.
So beyond footwear, where is retro going to trend?
Yeah, I think we still see a big push in apparel. Again, as I said earlier, I think retro in athletic apparel is going to be a very important story going forward.
So shorty shorts for the basketball player?
Exactly.
Oh, man.
Exactly.
Your thoughts on that between...
My thoughts on those shorty shorts were terrible. I saw somebody... I was at a high school reunion recently, and they showed a picture of me in my basketball uniform.
Scary,
I had this huge hair and this tiny little shorts. I was like, I hope that never comes back.
Next year. Next year.
Yeah,
Are you seeing retro, though, come up in fashion apparel?
It doesn't. You know, the interesting thing about fashion is they're so busy trying to redefine who they are and what they do. We have to keep exciting, products into the marketplace. Fabric tends to not lead to that retro thing, but there are certain things that do lend itself to. So you will see the classics and the heritage products that are being rediscovered. I'll give you a great example. The younger generation has decided that Sperry topsider boat shoes are the hot thing. Well, they're also simultaneously selling them to the boomers, okay? Yeah. So here it is that, you're all sitting there saying, well, wait, why would the younger crowd want to do anything that the older crowd does? But this is that process. So retro does have a place in many ways. And if you also look around, you're going to start to see all kinds of candy that the boomers grew up on, resurfacing candy as in snacks, okay? Look outside. I think you might see at the break they served some retro candy. Did they have dots?
Pop Rocks? Right? Pop Rocks.
Pop Rocks, okay, that's exactly what we're talking about. So I couldn't get any more current than just the last break. But it's really about recognizing that's where we're starting to go. We're starting to literally see retro find its way back in, whether you're in the in the jewelry business, whether you're in the fashion business, whether you're in even in the home business. Look at the influence that retro has on all the design of product.
Perfect. To wrap this up before we go to Q&A, sports industry, 3 things most important they need to do to keep driving their sports business.
It's all about innovation. They've got to constantly be coming up with fresh and new products. That's
1.
really key.
2.
He doesn't go past 2.
It's all about product. I'm a product guy, so I'm gonna keep coming. It's all about product.
Marshall, in the fashion space.
The first
top
thing
3
the fashion
things
industry has to do is get rid of the sports industry.
1.
That's the first thing they have to do. No, but what they do have to do is take it on. They have to recognize that they can't keep allowing themselves to be beat to the punch. They have to get out in front of the process. The second thing they have to do is learn what people want. They have to learn to be out and recognize what's happening. If you just looked at how the consumer was dressing, you would have seen this active, trend coming years ago. This is not brand new. But what happened was all of a sudden you started to see the numbers, you started to see the stores do it, and then the consumer was doing this, finding it wherever they could find it, and the retailer wakes up. The retailer has to get out in front of the process. Awesome. And the brands do too.
Awesome. So we've got the speaker
Catch
box there. So we'll open the floor up for questions for Marshall and Matt for the last few minutes. We got one right here.
Marshall, you mentioned millennials are spending, but they're not acquiring. And I think we've seen some changes around minimalism and people buying less, maybe having smaller closets, not feeling like they need as much stuff. What are your thoughts on that, and do we need to reset our expectations around growth, particularly in fashion and maybe then again related to sports and athleisure?
The good news for sports, and Matt can add to this, is that's a passionate category already. So they will spend on that almost before they'll spend on some of the other things. Fashion has a problem because in this current generation, you ask about millennials, fashion's not a high priority. Adventure, travel, social media, passionate sports, and it's a crazy generation if you really think about it. This is a generation of very strong dichotomy. They sit there and they tell us how they want to live healthy, but then they'll go out and, smoke e-cigarettes like crazy just so they can, and then I'll go to the gym and work out harder because I did that. Or they'll binge eat, and they eat these crazy things, but then they'll go eat healthy for the rest of the week. So what we have is this interesting dynamic at play. What you have to recognize is, yes, they're operating with less budget. Yes, they're operating with less closet space. Yes, they're operating, but in many cases, they still are acquiring. So you have to make it important, make it part of the process of what they're doing to acquire product. That's how you're going to resonate with getting them to actually spend that dollar on your product versus somebody else's. And it may not even be you're competing against your direct competitor. You could be competing against their dollar spent from somewhere completely different.
Matt, any perspective on that from a sports athleisure perspective?
Yeah, well, I think one of the other angles is that sport athletes are celebrities today, and we are taking a lot of our cues and purchases from celebrities, and I don't think that changes. And sport now is the primary, outside of music, is the primary celebrity generation of a category. So I think that will continue to be a very important story.
Great. Yes.
It was great, guys. Thank you very much. Matt, Marshall, and really Matt. Matt, you've talked, at least to me, about compression of fashion life cycles and how brands should maybe think about planning for obsolescence if they're in a hot category. If that's the case, what are the implications for retailers? What are the implications for manufacturers? Could you maybe flesh that out?
Well, there's certainly a bigger conversation here about margin and planning and so forth. But yes, we have absolutely seen the fashion cycles in sports compress. We used to, the 70s was the running decade, and then the 80s was the basketball decade, and then we talked about trends lasting 8 years and 5 years. And the marquee performance basketball business, I don't want to get too granular here, but the marquee performance basketball business is now over as a fashion trend that lasted 3 years. And in the footwear industry, we're 18 months, 20 months from concept to retail. When a trend is only going to last 3 years, that's really problematic. So the model totally has to change, and there has to be a different, we're using the same margin structure and the same purchasing discounts that we did when Phil Knight started 30 years ago. And the world has changed a lot, and we have not changed the model.
Do you think that 18 months can be compressed, or is that just what we're going to live with forever?
I'm sorry, say again?
The 18 months, can that be compressed from idea to actual reality on the shelf?
Well, I think with some of the new manufacturing techniques, yes. I think that we can speed things up. But I think the concept almost of how we make a shoe today has to change. And we almost start out with a blank slate and begin the process from zero, as opposed to finding ways to build the process from the middle and
Great.
save some time.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, the question's for Marshall. So earlier in the presentation, you said fashion brands must compete with the sports brands through adding technology, basically upping the quality of the product and delivering that to the consumer. But if your distribution tier is department stores, how do you overcome the obstacle of this adding better products and then competing with their pricing structure of pricing it very high, out of price really, or out of range of what it could be, what their consumer is willing to pay, and then ultimately selling at a lower price where you're now going to have to contribute margin and try to stay profitable. How do you get it done?
So what you're asking is, do retailers ask for money when the product doesn't sell? The answer is we know yes. But having been a retailer, I can tell you I did it all the time. But no, you're asking a really important question. And that is, justify the reason why the consumer is willing to pay more for a product. And the only reason that a consumer will pay more for it is they're either desperate for the product, or they can't get it anywhere else, so the old supply and demand, or the product is enhanced to such a point where it elevates their needs, lifestyles, or desire for the product. So really what I'm saying is you have to learn how to tier the product within the structure. So you can get, and if we go back to the slide earlier where we showed all those innovative products, one of the interesting dynamics is those are average selling prices that were higher than they were years before. And what's happening is it's because those products have been innovative, they're new, they're exciting. You know, Fitbit was the #1 item last holiday. Why would it look to be the #1 item again this year unless it was all about copycat business, meaning second tier, second wave? That's not going to be the driver. But what is going to be the driver is that they came up with Generation 2. And they're going to create a new and more exciting reason. You don't need a new cell phone unless that phone has upgrades to it and you're willing to pay more money for it. So think about the dynamic at play. When you find a product that's better, you are willing to invest in it. The automobile industry has remodeled itself on that. You can buy a luxury vehicle for $150,000 all the way down to a $30,000 for the same brand. They figured out how to compete in that down market by creating a marquee, lower price product and create an even higher priced new luxury product.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm not from your category, either the fashion or the
well, welcome to our world.
But I'm curious because I think there could be some parallels between what you're talking about there into where I'm from, which is actually the jewelry category. And you talked about millennials' desire, and you mentioned the boy that came in and wanted his cotton T-shirt they'd never discovered before. But the millennials' desire for sort of personalization and that discovery of something new, are you therefore seeing that the independent or those niche designers having greater success? And I know that I did a little research and I came across this market aggregator called Farfetch. I don't know if that you're familiar, I'm sure you are. News to me anyway. And they represent something like 400 independent designers and 2,000 designers or something. 400 independent shops and 2,000 designers. And I guess my background here is coming at it from knowing that in the jewelry, despite many portents to say that the independent jeweler, you know, your local trusted jeweler, is going to die and be overtaken by the big specialists. I've sort of always been, and never sort of thought that to be totally true. So I'm curious to know if fashion is still holding up in that, I guess, segmented niche space. Sorry, it's a rather long way to get to what
The,
that makes
the,
sense.
the future of retail favors the boutique brands, the specialty retail, because again, it's relationship. It's also going to be that much easier in the future to be able to have that dynamic through the internet. I can have a relationship with your brand or your store anywhere in the world. That's a huge difference to what it was before. So the difference is going to be the consumer is going to have this working relationship and having the ability to be able to do that. So it levels the playing field. The great thing about the internet is it literally levels the playing field. It gives you just as much reach potential as even a behemoth brand.
Thank you both. We appreciate it, Matt and Marshall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes our session. Please relax, refresh, and get ready for the Wang Gala this evening. We'll start with cocktails promptly at 6:30 and continue into an entertainment-filled evening when the soulful dream girl Jennifer Hudson performs in concert with the internationally celebrated Boston Pops to mark NPD's 50th anniversary. This evening will include amazing music, a delightful dinner, and the opportunity to connect with IDEA 2016 attendees. Be sure to bring your badge to ensure access to the gala. See you at 6:30.